brief glimpse of the Steve Blank you may not know. Steve as jiu-jitsu master, Steve as fence painter, and Steve as the leader of a revolution. My first story, to give you a glimpse of Steve as jiu-jitsu master, is also answering the question many of you are asking, which is, why am I here now introducing Steve? It's a really good question, and frankly, one I'm asking myself right now. And the reason I chose jiu-jitsu is it represents the manipulation of an opponent's force against himself, rather than confronting with your own force. That's a critical part of Steve's modus operandi. In fact, Steve has an uncanny ability to create an advantage from small, almost imperceptible moves of others to make a dent in the universe that's to his liking. You see, when I heard about Steve getting this award, I sent a simple email, because it was only by invitation, asking if I might be allowed to come. So I sent Natalie an email. Natalie is a member of Steve Blank's teaching team at Haas and the National Science Foundation. I'd love to be present as Steve is recognized later this month. Thank you, Jim. Natalie responded, hello, Jim. We'd be happy to offer you a 25% discount using a special super secret code. And if you'd like to receive a comp pass, you need to request this via Steve, who can email us. Should you require any additional assistance, please let me know. Now, of course, when you hear comp pass, you have to ask. So I send Steve an email. Steve, mazel tov. How cool is this? Second point, I'm planning to come and happy to pay, but since they mentioned that you might have juice for a comp, I thought I'd ask. To which Steve replies, a very simple Steve Blank response. Be careful what you ask for. See the next email. 2 seconds later, there's an email to Chris. Chris, I just found out Jim Hornthal, my co-instructor, will be in town, and Jim will be introducing me. So let him know what you want. He'll be my guest for the evening. Thank you, Steve. So what did I learn? I learned you have to be very careful what you ask for with Steve, because remember, he is a jiu-jitsu master. This is a skill he further refined. Steve is fence painter par excellence. Steve has an uncanny ability to enlist other people in his crusade to remake entrepreneurship education, or what he's fond of calling e-school. It's a big job, and he's become adept at recruiting others to help paint his fence. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means innovating beyond a flipped classroom, which was a brilliant creation that last year's honoree Sal Khan was recognized for. But Steve wasn't content to just have a flipped classroom. He added 2 more innovations. The first is a teaching team, and it's made up primarily of other entrepreneurs and early-stage investors. And second, he inverts the lecture hall. So the teaching team sits at the back. So now instead of one teaching many from the front, it's a weekly review of peer-led discoveries, moderated, cajoled, and exhorted from the rear of the room by a team of experienced entrepreneurs and investors led by Steve. Now, if you've never seen a Lean Launchpad class in person, picture in your mind Shark Tank meets American Idol. It works. And if Steve is Tom Sawyer, then I'm proud to count myself as one of his many Huck Finns, because it's one hell of a fence that he's created. And all this from a man who was thrown out of Michigan State and the University of Michigan. You see, it took a severe case of ADD to force him into a successful career in the military, which then led to a stint in the spook business at ESL, which is known as the father of national reconnaissance, so just think of it as the PRISM of yesteryear. And then this led to a string of startups. One major hit, several singles, a few mandatory craters, each failure contributing to the layer of scar tissue and experience, forging the restless innovator that you see today. Steve's curiosity led him to understand his prior accomplishments and failures as he tried to decode the innovation genome in his first book on the topic, 4 Steps to the Epiphany. But something was missing. So Steve kept looking to find this entrepreneurial API, the pieces of the puzzle that wouldn't only make sense to him but to others and be a resonant chord in the valley. So Steve's fond of saying the definition of a startup is a temporary organization designed to discover a repeatable, scalable business model. And that's what Steve's done. With the business of discovering how to discover a business model. They say if you teach a man to fish, what if you teach teachers how to teach men and women how to fish? Now that's a really big idea, and that's a revolution that Steve is the leader of. The Lean Startup Revolution has begun in earnest. If you want proof, you have to look to the National Science Foundation, who's adopted Steve's teachings and the methodology to the I-Corps program. And if you're still curious and skeptical, go look at the cover of the current Harvard Business Review, and it's got Steve's manifesto gracing its cover. So what does Steve expect for his teams? More than humanly imaginable. When Steve says get out of the building, he means it. We had one team at Berkeley that was doing customer development on cancer therapies, and they barnstormed the chemo unit at UCSF. They were politely asked to leave. They came back again and conducted a few more interviews. They were asked to please leave again. When they came to the class and explained that the security guards had to force them out of the building and told them to never come back, Steve led a standing ovation by the teaching team for the CAN-SCAN team. Why a standing ovation? A, they weren't arrested. B, very importantly, no one died. But C, they learned so much from the interviews. Relentless, ambitious, and fearless, Steve is an entrepreneur's entrepreneur and a true revolutionary. I think the methodology that he's helped them discover will live far beyond any one technological innovation and represents the building blocks of successful entrepreneurship, a way to systematically go from innovation to commercialization and to help startups fail less. It's the beginning of an era when we begin to decode the true genome of innovation and entrepreneurship. So sit back and reflect on the sublime beauty and hilarity of the moment. I know Steve and Allison are doing that right now. To be honoring a man from such humble beginnings who's transformed himself into the most recent career as a professional who today holds faculty credentials from Stanford, Columbia, Berkeley, Caltech, and I'm sure by the end of tonight there'll be a few more people clamoring to take this Thomas Edison of entrepreneurship education and call them their own. I'm proud to present someone I call my friend, Steve Blank.
Well, I can't top that, right? Better than the webpage. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to keep it very short because there's nothing left to say. But, you know, the Valley really has two pieces of its culture that all of you kind of contribute to. One is this pay it forward culture, where we kind of are obligated socially to help the younger generations understand what it is that we learned painfully and hard-won and hard-earned. And I think all of us here are part of that. And that, to me, and actually started with Bill Draper, who's sitting here in the corner. This is very different than almost any other culture. In any other place, what you know becomes kind of coin of the realm. But here we share it. And I was a recipient of that for multiple generations of mentors in Silicon Valley. The second is, when I get foreign visitors coming out to ask me about Silicon Valley, the first question I ask them is, you know, we have a special word for a failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. Do you know what it is? And they look at each other and go, the special word for failed entrepreneur in Silicon Valley is called experienced. And that's an integral part of the culture. I'll just close with telling you just a brief story. I lived that. It's my second to last startup. It was a video game company. I actually got out of my comfort zone and did a company where I actually hated my customers. That's no, don't do that. It's a bad idea. But I was still good at what my core skill was, is we managed to get press regardless of how much I didn't like my customers. And I found myself on the cover of Wired magazine. And with my team. And 90 days after being on the cover, I realized the company was going down the tubes. And pretty soon after it did, I blew $35 million of venture capital money. And I called up my mother, who was a Russian immigrant, and I said, Mom, I lost $35 million. And since that wasn't her first language, there was always a pause. And so, yeah. Then she said, oh, so where'd you put it? And I said, no, Mom, you know, it's like I spent it. And then she broke into Russian and Polish and said, the country we came from is no longer there, but there's no place for us to go. And then she thought a little bit and said, and our name is blank, and we can't even change it. And why the Valley is great is that my next startup, I returned several multiples of 2 funds and managed to retire and see my kids, understanding that while 8 startups was a great journey, my best days were ahead of me, and I had no idea what they are, and I still don't. But what a great adventure to be in Silicon Valley. So thanks to all of you.
And now we have Salim Ismail to introduce his friend, Peter Diamandis.
So I've been here in Silicon Valley for about 7 or 8 years, and I came across Peter 5 or 6 years ago as we were Singularity University was just launching. Now, Peter has a rather interesting and colorful background, for those of you who don't know him. When he was at Harvard, he got an MD, PhD, and they gave him his degree only on the condition that he didn't actually practice medicine. Right? So that tells you some sense of